to introduce myself. I'm Jack Butler. I'm the Dean of the School of Arts at University West of England, and I'm absolutely delighted to welcome you to the Bristol Distinguished Address Series, which is a wonderful series that provides opportunities for us to hear unique perspectives and insights from change makers who've achieved amazing things in Bristol and beyond, and here's the evidence. Tonight's event is part of the Being Human Festival, the UK's national festival for the humanities, taking place between the 6th and 15th of November, so we're almost coming to the end of the festival. It's led by the School of Advanced Studies at the University of London, with the generous support from Research England in partnership with Arts and Humanities Research Council and the British Academy. And this year's theme, Between the Lines, asks us to see what is hidden in plain sight, to listen to the unheard voices, and to question the spaces in between, which I think is really apt for this evening's panel discussion. So to begin, we'll start with a short film. Thank you. Okay, I don't normally read from a script, but please forgive me because there's so much to say about these pretty amazing people, and I don't want to miss a thing. And if I do, Verity will pick it up in the panel discussion. Okay, so the title of this session is Between Digital and Physical Worlds, Artists Reimagining Reality, and it brings together 4 artist researchers that contribute to the School of Arts research community, each offering inclusive leadership and accessible pathways to participation in immersive arts for artists and audiences across the UK and further afield. Within the School of Arts at UWE, we encourage deep thinking alongside spontaneous play. Contradictory behaviours, I'm sure you're aware, they're very welcome in art schools, and positive agitation and misbehaviour can be enriching and acts as a catalyst for change. From my perspective, insatiable curiosity drives innovative arts practice, instigating new ways to think about encounters and experiences of the world around us. This evening, you're invited, all of you, to immerse yourselves in a dynamic collision space where creativity meets new technologies, weaving a space of wonder that fuels new ways to imagine. By using the technological tools of our time through collaborative research that connects people across communities, we can make and remake stories that have been overlooked, forgotten, or perhaps until now been left unheard. Tonight's panel will explore how art is being reimagined through bold actions, interactivity, and collaborative practice, making art more accessible and inclusive by inviting the audience to be part of the action. I now have the pleasure of briefly introducing, because I think Verity is going to go into much more detail, each of the panel members. So we have at first our lovely host, Verity McIntosh. And Verity is the Associate Professor of Virtual and Extended Realities at UE within the School of Arts. She is a Director and Principal Investigator of Immersive Arts, a £6 million UK-wide programme of research, training, funding and events which support artists to engage with immersive technology. Verity's research practice is often deeply rooted in partnerships with industry. She works with artists, creative companies, civic institutions and policymakers to make meaningful change in the sector. Her work has been discussed in the UK, House of Commons and House of Lords, UE Parliament, that's EU, not UE, EU Parliament, Council of Europe, and in multiple print and media contexts all around the world. So we'll take a little breath for Verity, because you're a very busy woman. Now, I think that you might be in a slightly different order, because we've got Tessa here, who I'm going to introduce next. And Tessa's a Glasgow-based artist, researcher, and creative producer working in XR and immersive technologies. They currently are a research fellow within the Immersive Arts programme at UE, and that is part of a job share with one of our other panellists, Karen. Tessa's recent research explores embodied XR documentary ethics, and their creative projects traverse themes of sexuality, gender, and queer identity, often employing forms of co-design with represented communities and contributors. Tessa's work has been commissioned by Unlimited, Story Futures, BBC and BFI, and exhibited at Sheffield Dockfest, Raindance International Film Festival, Venice International Film Festival, and International Documentary Festival of Amsterdam. So it's a wonderful international portfolio. And I'm going to sort of skip and move to Karen, just because these two are kind of co-workers, so I thought it would be quite nice to connect them back. And Karen Wise is a practice-based researcher exploring the applications of immersive technologies to dance and in performative practice. She's also a research fellow within the Immersive Arts programme with Tessa's job share, and Kerry's research aims to understand how the use of new technology impacts artistic approaches to audience experience of arts and cultural content. Kerry is also co-lead of Display Studio, a mixed reality performance studio whose pioneering work has toured nationally and internationally to festivals that include South by Southwest in Austin, Texas, and the Festival of International Virtual and Augmented Reality Stories in Toronto. And I'm moving finally to Tosin Olufon, who is an immersive artist and researcher. Having completed her master's at UE Bristol, she is currently undertaking a PhD and almost at the stage of her first year of examination. So I think we have to give a very special round of applause at the end for that one. Tosin is taking a practice-based approach to cultural preservation, exploring the possibilities of preserving African folktale heritage through virtual reality and animation. Her work is deeply personal and rooted in the belief that every XR experience should evoke emotion, spark curiosity, and encourage us to see the world in new ways. Tosin has always been fascinated by the tales and traditions she grew up with and those of other cultures. So you guys, I am now going to hand over to Verity for what I would imagine is just going to be a fantastic panel discussion.
Thank you very much, Jack. Round of applause for Tosin. Let's get that done. Thank you. Thank you very much, Jack, and to the team at the Bristol Distinguished Address Series and at the Being Human Festival for inviting us to come together and have this conversation. But also a huge thank you to you for coming and joining us, those of you in person, those of you joining via the live stream, and those of you watching later on. We really hope that this will be a conversation as well as an opportunity to kind of talk So with that in mind, let me press my clicker and say, hello, this is me. I'm Verity McIntosh. I will be chairing the panel today, and before too long, we will be opening out to the audience and coming to speak to you and taking your questions as well. Before all of that, I would like to embody what Jack was just saying about immersive arts being something that actively engages the audience and give you an invitation to do something with us before we start to talk to you. And so to my right, your left, you may notice an empty chair. Yes, you all say, I see the empty chair. I'm excited. I'm inviting you to imagine that in this currently empty chair, it's not empty at all. There's actually a child sat in that chair. I think they're about 4 or 5, hard to tell at that, probably just about school age. Maybe it's someone that you know now, maybe it's someone that you used to know, maybe it's you when you were that age. But call them to mind. Here they are, sat in this chair. Does their head sort of clear the back of the chair? Do their legs meet the floor? Probably not. Are they moving their legs? What are they up to? Are they enjoying the attention? Are they very embarrassed? Are they fidgeting? Are they touching the chair? Are they fidgeting with their fingers? Do they possibly need a wee with all that fidgeting? Are we concerned that perhaps they're going to have to go in a minute? Can we really hold their attention with a 4-person panel about immersive arts? Not sure. But there they are. Do you have them in mind? How do you feel about me now? There is something slightly extraordinary about the power of our imagination to blend realities. And we're seeing increasingly with tools like virtual and extended realities that blending of the imaginative, the potential, and the real space that we inhabit is becoming closer and closer. There's a kind of in our sector, relatively famous psychology experiment that was first conducted a few years back in Stanford by a guy called Jeremy Bainson, called the empty chair experiment, where he would give people augmented reality glasses, show them pictures of people in a very sort of boring waiting room sitting in chairs, and then not really tell them anything about what's going on. They'd just be sat in a waiting room. But then when their headset came off, they'd invite them to sit in a chair. And without fail, people would not sit in the chair that had been inhabited by a virtual character. It's not that they thought they were there. Everybody objectively knows that wonderful child that I just squashed with my callousness isn't there. But you still are able to kind of conjure that blended reality using your imagination. And with tools like virtual reality, mixed reality, augmented reality, we're increasingly being able to kind of blend that imaginative space with our physical space. It can be really, really powerful and really potent. And for artists, it can be an extraordinary kind of affordance to work with, one of many of the affordances that we'll hear about today, I'm sure. But I wanted you to just sort of start by thinking about the theme of the Being Human Festival is this idea of between the lines. And I think one of the things that interests us about these new technologies and tools isn't just that they're kind of fancy tech, but that they can start to kind of trouble our understanding about what is real, what is imaginary, what is tangible, what is ephemeral. And in a time where perhaps sort of truth and authenticity and authorship have never been more confused or under threat, this question for artists of how do you kind of trouble reality, how do you blend between the real and the virtual has never been more sort of up for grabs. So I wanted to do that small experiment with you, and then I will explain a little bit about what we do. Oops. Are you still seeing them on the chair? Are they okay? I'm so sorry. I'm lighter than I look. So to give you a bit of context for me and my work and the work that the team on the stage all contribute to in different ways, I run a program called Immersive Arts, which is a UE-led international, let's not get crazy, UK-wide program supporting artists to engage with immersive technologies in lots of different ways. We're a £6 million program supported by 5 of the UK's amazing kind of arts invested institutions, so Arts and Humanities Research Council on the academic side, Arts Council England, Arts Council Wales, the Arts Council of Northern Ireland and Creative Scotland all support this extraordinary development programme that we have to support artists in this space. We are a consortium of 10 incredible partners coming together from across the UK. I won't list them all because we use all our time, but we have deliberately chosen to work with people who are very embedded in the arts and culture scene across the UK and who are heavily invested in supporting artists and creating accessible opportunities. We particularly work with partners who have broader understanding than we do, or certainly I do, around things like accessibility and inclusion, so that we can design a programme together that hopefully lowers some of the barriers to entry for artists who are engaging in this conversation with us. The question of what do we mean by immersive arts is usually a good place to start. We know that immersive and arts are both quite slippery terms, and they mean really different things to different people. By no means are we trying to kind of set a definitive record on what it is, but we do try to put some language and some shape to what we mean so that people can kind of find us and their own community within the sort of breadth of what we talk about when we're talking about immersive arts. So for us today, when we talk about immersive arts, we talk about art that uses technology to actively involve the audience in some way. So that can be engaging multiple senses, it can be bridging those gaps between the physical and the digital that we were just looking at there, and they can be about connecting people to each other and to the environment through these experiences. The sort of centre of the programme is our determination and commitment to centering equity, diversity and inclusion as a core pillar of the programme. It's a national scheme, and we are very committed to making change with this sort of national profile that we hold. We recognise that for lots of reasons and in lots of ways, the immersive arts sector, the arts sector and the technology sector all have structural inequities that are inherited from decades and centuries of institutionalised prejudices. We know that there is an opportunity with a sector that is starting kind of from scratch now to try and reset some of those inherited prejudices. And so we work inclusively and we work deliberately to try and unseat some of those sort of structural inequities. So a lot of the choices we've made about the way that this scheme comes together have been founded on this determination to try and lower barriers to entry, create inclusive pathways to participation, and really celebrate a real breadth of voices and talents in this space. It's such an early moment for the immersive sector. Those who are making now, including these extraordinary people on the stage with me, are having a slightly outsized impact on the future because they are the kind of the founders of this sector, and the work that they do and the things that they say has a huge kind of ripple effect into the future. So for us, it could not be more important that this is not a time for the usual suspects. This is a time to be setting a new tone for a sector that can then flourish and thrive and develop across all sorts of different ways. Thanks, Abby. So in practice, we do a bunch of training and events. We've been around the country quite a lot lately, talking to lots of people in different places. We have a broad programme of research that we can talk about a bit later if it's useful. All four of us are involved in different ways in this research programme. And we have about 3.8 million in grant funding that we award to artists who apply through our programmes. So just to give a sense of the scale of that, we can award £5,000, £20,000 or £50,000 according to the stage that people are at with their work. We have had now something like 5,000 applications for that, so we're really seeing that there's a huge demand and an appetite and a real kind of like vibrancy in the sector that there isn't really resource to kind of meet at this point. We're able to support about 200, 220 artists through this scheme, but we're recognising that it's just scratching the surface and there's so much potential for kind of sustainable growth if we invest in this sector more and understand it better. So that's immersive arts, which is sort of a bit of a bedrock and a background for what we're on about today. But it's my pleasure now to be able to hand over to the researcher practitioners on the stage to be able to tell you a little bit more in detail about what the immersive arts practice can look like. So I'm going to invite Karen to take you over from here. I'll leave you a clicker. Thanks, Karen.
Hi everyone, great to be here and to be able to share a little bit of my practice with you today. So I've been working within the kind of dance and technology world for about 25 years now. I began working with sort of video projection way before there were programs that did it. So in the point where we were kind of literally lining up 3 or 4 different video projectors and projecting them onto different parts of the wall or the dancers' bodies or different kind of fabric screens. And yeah, kind of thinking about how does that change the body? And I've always been interested in the live body being kind of with the digital in some way. So I've made interactive video installations, film projects, so yeah, lots of different technologies. In the last 6 years, I've been working specifically with virtual and mixed reality, specifically a technology called volumetric capture, which I'm going to talk about a little bit later, VR and live performance. So my work and my practice research has always been interested in understanding immersion and what immersion means for audiences, but also what it means for us as academics. Like Verity said, it's a little bit of a slippery term. Embodiment, as a dance practitioner, I'm always interested in not only my own embodiment and the dancer's embodiment, but actually how can I, within the practice, get audiences to have more of a sense of their own body? What ways can I make that happen through the work? Notions of liveness. So in an increasingly digital world, you know, what does liveness mean now? Yeah, so those kind of debates around, you know, is it live if we're kind of streaming this? Is it still live if you're watching it at home, if you're watching it on a phone? You know, is it live if you're watching it later? So actually, what do we understand by liveness? We go to concerts and actually everybody's watching on their phone or on a big screen. You know, is that live? So I'm interested in that. Intimacy in digital and hybrid performance. So can we still, with the digital, find these moments of intimacy and connection? So that's what I'm exploring within my practice. I often work in non-traditional settings, so I don't really make work for traditional theatres and audiences sort of sat like you are with a kind of in front of a stage. I don't really work with kind of that setting. I often make site-specific work. So I did a project called Displace, which was in an old disused Georgian building. And audiences went on a journey through that building, one at a time. And in that, they met live dancers, several different live dancers on different rooms of the building. They wore bone-conducting headphones, which just sit on the ear here, so you can hear a pre-recorded soundtrack and the live sound, and then we mic'd up different parts of the building so that it was really playing with, you were hearing a sound, but you couldn't see that sound, so messing with your sense of perception. And then there were other moments on that journey where you put on a VR headset and you get transported to different parts of the building that you weren't able to go to physically. So I've always been playing with this pull and push between the virtual and the physical. I've worked in galleries. I've also I toured a piece of work with dance and projection to lots of Art Deco cinemas. So yeah, often working in spaces that you wouldn't normally kind of see traditional dance performance. Audiences are absolutely central to my practice, and I often actually make work for smaller audience numbers. And for me, that allows me to create meaningful experiences that somehow place the audience within the experience. My research more broadly, and the work that I'm doing sort of through the Immersive Arts program, is looking at applications of immersive technology to dance and performance practice to understand what new kind of artistic approaches and methods are coming out of the practices that are engaging with new technologies. I'm also investigating audience experiences of dance, arts, and cultural content using new technology. So how is this work reaching audiences, but also how is it changing their experience? So my latest project, and the image on screen, is called Replica. And Replica is an emotive mixed reality dance performance that uses immersive technology to display a virtual dancer who interacts and occupies the same space as a live performer, allowing her, in essence, to duet with her digital double. The dancer is recording using a technology called volumetric capture, which uses depth cameras to create a kind of three-dimensional virtual person who looks a little bit more like a video, like a film. And you can walk around that person as if they were kind of there and see them from multiple angles. The virtual dancer is viewed through the VR headset, which is mixed reality to see the real world with a digital layer, which the audience participant wears during the experience. So in this 10-minute performance, audiences discover how it feels when real and virtual performers interact in real time and are prompted to consider key human issues around digital doubles, presence, memory, and ownership of their body image. At the moment, we've toured this to 3 UK venues, a dance venue, a kind of theatre venue, and an immersive venue. We've just taken it to the Art VR festival in Prague. And I've been collecting lots of audience data and responses to that work, which I'm going to be analysing and kind of writing up as an article, as a publication. So I'm just going to show a really short teaser now to give you a little bit of a sense of what that work is.
in an increasingly digital world, where is the place for real human connection?
I think my time is almost up. So yeah, just signposting to some recent publications. You're probably not going to be able to read all of that there, but yeah, I tend to write about my own practice and specifically about volumetric capture, which is a relatively new technology. You might have heard of motion capture, but volumetric capture is newer, and there's sort of less written about that. So that tends to be what I focus on. Okay, so I shall pass over. Thank you.
Hello. My name is Tosi Onlufa, as introduced earlier, and I'm a heritage practitioner. My work is focused mainly on authenticating African folktales and reimagining them in virtual reality. So because the research is deeply personal to me, I'm focused on re-representing the tales I grew up with and projecting my people as my ancestors want them to be projected. But the research is really pro-VR because I believe it has so many possibilities, and it kind of replicates the conditions of the stories I'm trying to tell, which are usually deeply intimate and personal. So the VR project that I worked on during my master's is called Tales by Moonlight, Why the Gecko Lives in House Walls. It was my first experiment with virtual reality for African folktales using 3D animation. So because my focus was authenticating those folktales and preserving them as is, a lot had to do with the environmental design. So yes, virtual reality, extended reality has to do with, is heavily reliant on audience interaction. But how do I incorporate all of that while not taking attention away from those stories? So it had to do a lot with the environment design. So I had to experiment with alternate interactions. So people focused instead on the other elements in the world building, like the diamond-shaped elements below the environment model. People were encouraged to look down and go around it. The dioramas were built in such a way that they were about 3 feet wide and 2.5 feet across, because African folktales can be quite heavy. I mean, you have spirits, you have spiritism and other spiritual elements in it, and people get scared when they view that. So having that in mind, the environment design was done in such a way that the seemingly scary elements there, especially for audiences that might not understand what it involves, they were supposed to be cute. That led to some problems later, which I'll explain. So after dealing with that, the second part for experimenting in XR was motion sickness. Now, yes, I'm trying to protect my culture, but at the same time, audience experience is a heavy part of it. Art is like a product, and it's supposed to be usable and enjoyable. So if the focus is just on authentication and the audience doesn't enjoy what they're watching, then what's the point? Because part of retelling those folktales is also trying to entertain people, aside from trying to teach them. So there was issues at the initial audience testing with vibration and yes, nausea. So I had to find a way around that, which also determined the size of the environment. Then I learned early on that African dance doesn't work well with motion capture, and there were issues with that as well. And because there were animals involved, a lot of audience experimentation had to go into that. So it translated into...
He got lost a few times.
Oh my God, I'm so sorry. Yeah, so it translated into the spirits looking cute instead of looking terrifying and scary, and it encouraged the audience to go closer to the elements of the story. So the second project I worked on is The Whispering Forest. It was exhibited at the Honeyman Museum, and it was also about re-representing my culture. But there were issues situating them in the context, because a part of retelling the stories is also to decolonize them in a friendly environment, so to say. So initially, the people that commissioned the project wanted to name it Moremi. But in African culture, there is no place in African culture where the queen dances in public for people. So being part of that project helped me to decolonize that story and allowed external audiences to see it through my eyes. And XR allows that a lot. Aside that, African folk tales, like I said, is a deeply personal experience. The orator paints the pictures of the environment, of the stories, into the minds of the listeners. With XR, with virtual reality, you can do the same thing at the same time. You can tell the stories, and the audience is like they're going through the environment. They're asking questions without actually breaking immersion and interrupting the orator. So I can't say all of it right now, but maybe during the discussion, we'll talk about other parts of XR that are advantageous and problematic. Thank you.
Hello. I'm going to flick through some of your slides. Oh, that's my slide. Okay. So, hi, my name's Tessa Ratushinska. I am going to read from my notes, I'm sorry. I'm an artist, producer and researcher working in XR, which is just, a collective term for virtual reality, mixed reality, and I also work with other kinds of interactive experiences, like digital experiences, and I mostly make documentary content. So I just recently completed my practice-based PhD, which was exploring ethics, embodiment, and VR documentary. So the two images you can see on screen just now of my PhD project, which was called With These Hands. And in one image, you can see a person in a VR headset looking at their hands, and in the other image is like that user's point of view of them embodying these digital representations of a real contributor's hands. And With These Hands shares stories of sexual assault survivors as well as those accused of sexual harm, and was made in collaboration with those survivors and in consultation with a survivor-led organisation called Sleek. And most of my work has sought to think about how XR or immersive work can be made in a more collaborative or co-designed way. So I'm going to show a walkthrough, hopefully, of just plays. No? Oh, there we go. Walkthrough of a project that I made. I'm not actually going to describe it, but you can actually go to the website and do it if you like. The link's at the top there. I'm thinking about what kind of methods and tools of collaborative practice are available or possible in these mediums, and what are the ethical benefits of working collaboratively, but also the expanded artistic horizons that come from working with multiple artists. And my work is driven by questions of who gets to make these kind of experiences. So often that's people with access to funds, because the tech is quite prohibitively expensive, and also making work for the tech can be quite expensive to produce. But also questions about who it's made for and who gets to experience it, as well as who and what worlds are represented inside these experiences for audiences, and how those stories are told, particularly in a documentary context. So certainly all those questions are really pertinent to the research work I'll be doing on immersive arts. This is just a screenshot of the projects page of the website. And many of the funded artists with immersive arts have never worked with this technology before and are interested in these similar questions, like sharing their work with really specific audiences, like rural audiences, or some of the artists are thinking about the opportunities these more embodied or multisensory technologies might provide to make their work more accessible. And I did want to briefly share a trailer for a project I produced called Kindred, partly because it speaks to these themes, but also because it will be hopefully available to do in the networking session. And Kindred was a project that I produced, which was made as part of Story Trails, which is in some ways a kind of predecessor to immersive arts. It was a UK-wide tour of a whole bunch of commissioned immersive work that went to libraries and community spaces, and in doing so it reached diverse regional audiences who might not have been exposed to this kind of media before. And Kindred shares the story of the first openly non-binary person in the UK to adopt. And my role on this project as a producer was firstly to get the blessing of this real person to allow us to tell this story, or a kind of reimagining of their story. But also we consulted with a range of non-binary and trans parents, and we, in order to avoid repeating tropes about perhaps what being trans might look like or feel like, and worked with the majority trans and non-binary production team, and also to focus on how to tell this story, which meant focusing on the kind of universal centre of it, which is the deep desire to be a parent and offer an accepting home to a child who needs it. So hopefully this will play. Oh, there we go. Great. Oh, spoke too soon.
Ban the promotion of homosexuality in schools.
Children who need to be taught to respect traditional moral values are being taught that they have an inalienable right to be gay.
Belonging. I didn't really belong anywhere. I always wanted to be a parent. Back then it just didn't feel like an option. I was considered as a potential adopter a few times, but it never went through. I'm transgender, a non-binary trans person. I don't neatly identify as a man or a woman.
Thank you.
Do you want this?
No, we'll just let that be there. But just a small round of applause for everyone on the panel. Thank you so much for sharing those reflections with us. Thank you. Lovely. So hopefully you've got a bit of context for us and the work that we do. But I think we're going to start a bit of a conversation here now to start to explore some of those ideas. But we want to bring you in very shortly. So do start bubbling away what you'd like to talk to us about. And we'll come to you very shortly. So before that, as Chair's privilege, I would like to ask the panel to tell me a little bit about what you think is distinctive, I guess, about these XR tools. We know it's quite a broad term and that there's lots of tools and technologies that come into that, but I guess maybe from a personal point of view, what was it that kind of attracted you in? What were the affordances? What were the kind of the things that you thought there's something here that you really wanted to bring into your practice? I might start on the end and come towards.
Well, I guess the thing that made me want to bring it into my practice is I did VR and I just found it an amazingly immersive and engaging experience. And at the time I thought everyone must feel this way about VR. I've subsequently found out that other people have different experiences, but to me I thought this was the best thing I've ever done. But sort of now, 10 years on from that first experience, I'm really interested in how the technology works with the body and how it offers these other opportunities, particularly thinking about accessibility to kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? I've lost it. You can choose your own adventure in a way. You can say that you're someone who's more visual and the technology allows you to choose that path, or if you're someone who's more sensory or embodied, you can choose those different paths. Does that make sense? There's kind of opportunities for different sensory experiences within one experience that you can choose as well. The technology facilitates that. So that's what I'm interested in now.
Nice. How about for you, Tosin? What was it that made this the right tool for the work that you wanted to make?
For me, I think it's the way it commands attention. Attention is really expensive right now. It's like the most expensive commodity. But in XR, VR especially, you command the attention of the audience. They don't have like phone distractions and all of that. And African tools are quite serious. So it's jealous for attention, and VR provides that.
Yeah, I mean, I had a similar experience to you, is that I was creating all these kind of projected visual installations. I was making kind of sets and taking audiences inside those sets. And then I just watched Bjork's 360 video. I don't know whether, and I just was like, oh my God, this is the medium where I can really immerse audiences. And actually after that, I just bought myself a really cheap £100 360 camera and just started experimenting in the studio with what I could actually create with something that was really cheap. And, you know, there wasn't much around at that point of kind of, 360. I couldn't get hold of kind of high-tech 360 equipment, but actually I used the sort of the glitch aesthetic that came from that piece of really cheap tech as the kind of aesthetic of the work, and kind of just lent into that and created a sort of mixed reality performance using that really cheap technology. So for me, it's, that was really exciting. But now it's sort of the power of the medium to transport or take audiences somewhere very quickly. So actually Replica, the piece I was talking about, is only 10 minutes long. And audiences come out of that often really emotionally moved, often in tears, heightened senses. And so actually I just sort of think, wow, to be able to do that in such a short space of time is pretty amazing.
To get a feel for your experience, would you mind popping a hand in the air if you're comfortable doing so, if you feel like you've experienced something that you would call an immersive art style experience? Something, I'm not going to ask you to tell us about it, don't worry. So some, but not all. Is anyone in the room in the business of sort of making immersive art type things? Some, again. If you were putting your hand up on the live stream, we saw you, thank you, appreciate that. Loads of you are currently making work as we speak, hence not in the room. Thank you, that's really helpful. And obviously when we come to the Q&A, if you want to sort of tease out a little bit more about what we mean by any of these terms, it can be a bit word soup in this sector, so apologies. In terms of the business of actually kind of making the work, it'd be great to know a little bit more about the dynamics of what you have to kind of consider when you're making creative work using these immersive tools. Tessa, you mentioned a bit about working with contributors really closely as part of the documentary practice. Can you talk to us a little bit about what you think is important when you're working with contributors in these sort of immersive pieces?
Yeah, so it's been kind of a journey, and I do actually refrain from calling it co-design often because there's so much design that when you're making a virtual reality experience, I've got so much experience of understanding how to design that product that, you know, my contributor can never catch up, and I can't fully catch them up. I can show them some VR that I'm talking about, but we're never actually on the same level, so it isn't a fair statement to say it's co-designed. But for example, that piece of work I showed, Club XXY, a huge part of the kind of pre-production of that, I was working with Biome Studio in Glasgow, and we designed this kind of quite simple interface template. So the artists that I work with, most of them had never done VR before, most of them didn't even work digitally. One of them was like a collage artist, but they were able to print that template out in A4, make their work, scan it in, and then Biome had made this kind of drag and drop portal where they could see what that would look like in 3 dimensions. So thinking about ways, like the kind of tools around your co-design to make it as easy as possible for your contributors to imagine what their spaces will look like and really have authorship over them.
Thank you. Yeah, and similarly, I guess, in the making process, Tosin, what kinds of things do you have to consider when you're making something that is entirely, it has its sort of core in cultural heritage? What are the sort of considerations for you when you're making work that perhaps existed as oral history and are now kind of manifesting in a virtual environment? What are the considerations that you're chewing on?
Okay, from top of my head now, the first is cross-platform translation, because the stories are oral, and right now in my research, I'm going to they're going to move from oral to 2D, and then that's oral to 2D video, and then to VR. One way or the other, the story is going to kind of change. But since authentic preservation is the goal, how do I manage that in a medium where anything can happen, like VR? The second part is custodianship. I did get into trouble during the MA project, and I've told the story a few times where there was a part at the end where the king was dancing with animals. And all the while I was working, I was co-creating with my elders back home. I finished the clip one day, sent it back home, went to bed, and woke up to a barrage of WhatsApp messages of how could you and how dare you. And I kept on asking, what's the problem? What did I do? And they said, how dare I allow the king in his full regalia dance with the animals? Now, because I'm of a different generation, I felt it was cute. So that really got me into trouble, and I had to apologize a few times. So co-creation, custodianship, working with the elders, the living repositories of this culture is really important. So you don't unintentionally or intentionally offend. So sacrilege has become quite a big part of XR for me. So I have to consider those things when I'm working, among with so many other things I can't talk about right now.
Absolutely. Is it? Yeah. No, I could follow up forever, but I'm going to hold myself, and you can follow up. Karen, in terms of the work that you're doing, you're really kind of troubling those boundaries between live and recorded, and present and not present, and physical and digital. It feels like there's so much kind of like fluidity in that. Like, how do you approach as a maker something that is going to inherently kind of confuse all of those different things that we normally expect to be this or that?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I guess I would say that I'm really interested in placing audiences in that liminal space where actually their perceptions are being shifted, but they're also shifting between virtual and physical, and everything's sort of shifting all of the time. So in terms of attention, you're kind of really present in it because there's lots of things happening at the same time, and you don't quite know where you are in the work. I would say lots of testing and experimenting is very much part of my practice. Some of the technology that I'm working with, like volumetric capture and even the mixed reality work, you know, because the technology's only just reached a point where we can really do a lot of experimentation with this, we're often using the technologies sort of beyond their normal scope. So volumetric capture is often used for kind of static presentations where people aren't moving, and actually I'm going, oh, well, how can we push this with a dancer? How far can we go with it? So I'm kind of interested in the limitations of the technology being an affordance rather than seeing it as limiting.
Nice. Yeah, and a lot of that relational quality is between the work and the audience, and it feels like with immersive art, the audience is so important. Like, it doesn't exist without them in a way that in a way, a film could be on this screen and none of us could be here and it would still be a film, but immersive arts kind of requires your presence. So, given this is quite a new field and audienceship is still quite an unresolved question, like for anyone, I think on the panel, what do you think we need to kind of be considering when we're designing for audiences that may have never done anything like this before? What are our kind of responsibilities, or what might audiences need, like now or in the future, to be able to, for it to become a regular part of their kind of cultural landscape, and to feel comfortable and confident as viewers and potential makers of the future? Just throwing it out to the world.
Throw it back.
Who wants to play tennis for that?
I mean, we, because we're taking our work often to potentially dance or theatre audiences, or audiences who might not have done VR before, we tend to make work that doesn't use controllers, so that actually they don't have to worry, audiences don't have to worry that they're going to press the wrong button or they've got to do things. Actually, for me, I want them to just be immersed in what's happening, and because there's a live performer and digital and sound and sort of breath and the sound of all these different senses, that actually I feel like the controllers is just one other step too far, that actually it's enough for them to just be immersed in that story or that narrative. So yeah, not using controllers. And then another thing we've been doing is thinking about, we call this the onboarding and the offboarding. So basically the before the experience and the after the experience, because in that particular work I'm talking about, audiences are quite heightened emotionally when they come out. So actually what we don't want to do is just throw them back into the real world and say, all right, now get on with it. So it's actually thinking about, well, what needs to happen after the experience to actually just have a decompression space, or a space where you can just sit with a glass of water, or perhaps there might be someone from the team that you have a chat with. So yeah, those are a couple of things that we're doing or thinking about.
To butt in briefly on the controllers thing, I remember back in sort of 2013 when headsets first started being kind of made available in small ways, one of the first pieces bundled with an Xbox controller, and the assumption was that everybody knew how to use an Xbox controller, even when blindfolded by a headset, and that it just was predicated on this assumption that it's for gamers, it's for people who are incredibly confident interacting and doing kind of push button responses. And it didn't take long for that that assumption to be completely unseated, not least because a lot of the people that picked up these kind of early developer kits, as they were at the time, were artists who were fascinated by these affordances, these new potentials, and saw a huge barrier to not just asking people to blindfold and earfold themselves, but then handing them an Xbox controller and going, best of luck. So yeah, that kind of move into more intuitive interface design, I think, has been a really clear trend within the sector, and a lot of headsets now will recognise what your hands are doing and treat your hands as the interface, so you can touch and you can fondly, enthusiastically greet your small child on the chair. It just allows you to kind of bring some of that more embodied interaction in a way that had to be learnt from the arts sector, I think. Anyone else want to come in on that one?
I just wanted to add, there was a workshop I attended where it was mentioned that just because XR has the tendency for interaction doesn't always mean you should include it. Because I think as artists we tend to get carried away with the aesthetics, the possibilities, but like I said, it's a product and it has to be usable and as intuitive, as straightforward as possible. So yeah, maybe moving forward, you should also try to consider the number of interactions. Is it really necessary for the particular experiences?
Yeah, I do think we're still slightly in that tailwind of the headset being this shiny, techie looking thing, and that means people assume that that's what should happen in there. So I did actually a experience recently, like it was a demo of an artist's work, and we were all watching it, and someone said, "Why can't I fly?" And it was like, well, because in this experience you don't fly, but there's this assumption like, oh no, that's VR's for flying around, surely. So hopefully just as more content emerges and more, this range of artists that we're funded to work with these technologies, more people take up this more intuitive or delicate approach rather than just like this, heroic flying first-person shooter, maybe aesthetics that we're borrowing from other mediums at the moment.
Yeah, and I think there's something also around marketing. I'm not sure we've all, as artists making this work, well, I know for myself, haven't quite got the marketing worked out yet in terms of how do we actually get audiences to come to the work? What kind of imagery, do we need to actually encourage people to come and give it a try? And actually, does an image of someone in a headset put people off? Is the participatory nature of it, does that put people off? It's kind of...
We've all seen this image. I'm in a headset, there's purple, blue and pink light on me for some reason, and I'm very surprised. That's the poster child for this sector at the moment, and it tells you nothing about the experience. It's a real challenge about giving people the kind of the information that they might need to choose. And I think part of developing kind of a culture of audienceship is giving people a breadth of things that they can try. We wouldn't just play horror movies on this screen day in, day out. There's all kinds of different ways that you can engage with cinema and with games and with TV and with reading. We understand about genres and formats, and we develop our personal taste, and we hate some things and we love some things, and we tell our friends about some things, and we have guilty pleasures that we don't tell our friends about some things in almost every other creative media. But at the moment we're so early and there's so little kind of available to audiences in these tools that it is a bit like if you've seen one thing and you don't like it, then you hate that whole sector. One of the pieces of research that we shared recently, and you're very welcome all to check it out, is a piece that we did interviewing lots of venues, audiences, producers, artists, anyone we could think of really, to talk about how exhibition and distribution is working or not working right now. We're very fortunate here in Bristol because downstairs from here there's an amazing immersive gallery called Undershed, which consistently shares and shows work in this field. It's so rare. There are so few places like that. If you're lucky, you get to occasionally kind of like go to a festival and see some work, but most people don't. If you're really lucky, you might catch a pop-up in a shopping centre. Most people don't. So that kind of opportunity to develop what is your personal taste is really limited. And one of the things that we were pushing in this report is like, what do we need as a kind of a growing sector in terms of the infrastructure, the ecosystem, so that audiences can go, it's quite rainy today, I think I'll go do something in Watershed and check out some immersive work. And the more opportunities there are, I think the more we can develop our criticality, our journalism, our makership, and to be able to kind of form cults of enthusiasm around specific types of things that we love, that we want to see more of. And I think we are a little early for that to be true yet, but I'm really hopeful that we're getting there. We are getting to the point now where it would be wonderful to hear from you. So I believe there is a roaming microphone. Thank you so much. Very glamorous. If you'd like to share something, please do use the microphone, mostly for the live feed people so that they can hear you. I know you have wonderful, beautiful big voices, but that helps them to hear you. We've got a couple of questions coming in from online as well.
Hello.
Hello.
Oh, I can hear my voice. My name's Daniel. I'm a lecturer at UWE doing a part-time PhD in mixed reality for manufacturing maintenance in machines.
Sexy.
Yes. I'm also an artist, and I'm slowly moving into how to use also extended reality for other purposes, not just for industry in that purpose. And something that you've been talking about that I think is also quite exciting is about the new responsibilities that creators can have when blending these two words, these two worlds. And the main question, I was sort of like, I would raise the question, and also at the same time what I think about this, and is and this is based on, like, the example would be in my experience. I remember as a kid going to the cinema, watching a horror movie and being traumatized for a week or two until sort of I got away from that feeling that story embedded in me. Yeah. So now the question would be, if we are now blending these two worlds, how the impact will be on different mental health conditions, especially something like triggering psychosis or triggering schizophrenia on people, and how we have this added responsibility to curate for those things at the same time that we are sending a message or telling a story about something.
Yeah.
So
thank you.
Sort of like a question, but
it's a rich ethical field of challenges. Absolutely. Would anyone like to speak to that?
Well, it's not exactly the answer to the question, but it relates to that and the previous thing we were discussing, which is like, what does XR need? And I did work with this company, Limina, who were running a VR cinema. Limina were really interested in getting more women and older people to try VR. And really early on, we discovered like something that was blocking different people from engaging in the VR was not knowing how to leave. Because if you're a gamer or if someone who feels comfortable with the technology, you're happy to just take it off. But actually, some people don't feel comfortable doing that. And so, you know, part of the big design of the cinema app was just a portion on telling you how you could leave in this really simple way, which we designed as just looking down. But yeah, a lot of my work is about, you know, how do you manage consent in a VR context? And often that is about using the ability to have natural interaction rather than just using a back key. Or in that Club XXY, it was a bit more literal. It was like I made an exit door. Every space had an exit door. But in another project, it was like an interaction that you did. So VR makers taking that on board, or XR in general makers taking that on board, there has to be this easy way to come into a work, assess what the work is about as well. I'm not saying necessarily trigger warnings is the best way to do that, but a way to communicate what the work's about and a way to allow people to leave or choose what they get to experience. There's a great piece of work, Sasha Ware's piece, Museum of Austerity, that gave people the opportunity to choose to omit certain stories if that was something that they'd find challenging. So that's one way.
Yeah, there's a sort of a massive body of research from the 90s, well, before the 90s, but particularly the 90s plus, coming from a kind of neuroscience and psychology point of view, that points to this kind of different style of way that people report experiencing some of these experiences, particularly with virtual reality, but kind of across the spectrum. And one of the more kind of distinctive things is that people always come out and talk about a thing that they did. They talk in the first person as though it was an experience that they had. And a bit like with the chair, nobody is kind of fooled. We're not in sci-fi. Everybody knows that this isn't a direct in-person physical experience, but it is reported and kind of encoded in the way that they talk about it as something that they did. I was there, I did that, that happened to me. And that comes with a certain amount of kind of psychological proximity to the content that seems to be different to the way that we report seeing something on a screen or reading something in a book. And so we have to kind of take that seriously, I think, that we don't really fully understand what that psychological commitment is that we make to work that is so kind of close to the sort of three-dimensional world that we're used to. And we are, amazingly like susceptible to immediately going, oh yes, this is a 3D space. I'm hearing and I'm seeing in a way that corresponds to my sensory understanding about what's real, and so I accept this now as plausible. And so it is quite a different material, and I do think we, as people in this sector, have a responsibility to think carefully about what we do. One of the first experiences I did in a new space in the city was to test somebody's zombie game, and they didn't tell me that they hadn't fixed it yet, so I couldn't fight the zombies, and so I just got basically monstered by zombies and killed and eaten, and it was really awful. And I was so shocked. I didn't even think, oh, I should just come out of this. I don't like it very much. So I just stayed there until I was ravaged alive by these zombies, and it was really intense, and I felt dreadful for like weeks. So yeah, I do think there is something to be looked at carefully when we're thinking about what that consent position is, what people need to know, what their agency is to participate or not according to their own dynamic. So yeah, there's some important. We don't know enough yet, and we should be careful with what we to sort of really understand what we do know. Thank you. Would anyone else like to come in with thoughts, reflections, questions?
Thanks. I'm Dave Greenham. I'm Director of Research, School of Arts. You're talking about this very new technology. We're kind of at the bow wave of it, so to speak. Where is that bow wave in 10 years?
Who wants that one? It's a great question. Should we do some Imagineering?
Maybe I'm jumping the gun thinking of the questions that we got online. But of 5 questions, 4 of them were about AI. So I think it's unavoidable to not think about the intersection of the two technologies. Not that I know anything more than that or have any thoughts beyond that, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not an AI specialist either, so I don't know, but I agree that I think there are obviously very fast-moving landscape in terms of AI and how it's being used across lots of areas and fields, and artists are engaging with it, so let's hope that the artists do some good experimentation with it so that we've got a voice in there. But yeah, I don't know whether anyone else has more knowledge about AI.
I think, nobody has loads here, but I think I did some work with the Council of Europe a couple of years ago when we were looking at the kind of convergence of XR and AI, and I guess the main places we felt like it was going to be transformative is in content creation. We can see across all forms of creative media that the sort of sophistication of AI models to create content is getting better all the time, or more realistic all the time. Better is a loaded term. And we're just starting to see now these sort of Gen AI capacities to create 3D video. At the moment, it's really quite challenging to create 3D environments, characters, or interactions at the kind of the scale and resolution required for these sorts of tools. So that it's sort of slower to come into these XR tools than it has been in film and video. But we're starting to see now kind of procedurally generated environments, characters, and interactions and narratives being played with in like 8-second chunks in a way that film was a year ago. So it's sort of coming in that space to the extent that work that you might experience in these spatial environments is not necessarily made by someone who has thought about these questions. It can be being made according to certain criteria and prompts that have been created. So there's questions, as there is everywhere, about authorship and copyright and consent. There's also, I think, a challenge for particularly kind of multi-person environments and sort of social virtual environments at the moment about how people behave with one another, and there's been lots of kind of high-profile instances of people being really awful to each other in these spaces, partly kind of cloaked by the anonymity of being an avatar and partly just humans being shits. And so a lot of people are looking to AI to kind of moderate or observe or sort of be a kind of an eye in the room to identify potentially problematic behaviour and to have a kind of reporting system which has its pros and cons. Obviously, there's a real want within law enforcement, particularly, to be able to kind of have evidence to be able to hold people to account. But equally, it's basically another form of surveillance, and it's sort of in the interests of the tech companies to look at surveillance not just as a sort of policing tool, which in itself has lots of challenges, but also around data collection and behavioural analysis to be able to kind of persuade us into buying things and so on. So there's all kinds of challenges around AI suddenly becoming a kind of a presence in these spaces that at the moment are humans being avatars. And there's a bunch of stuff around privacy and data, and we could go deep with the AI problem. It is sort of simultaneously being held up in our sector as the solver of all the problems and the creator of all the new problems, and both those things are true, I think. So yeah, it's a lot. The other thing I would say about where it's going is I think there's been a massive kind of shift, certainly in the way that sort of the tech companies are envisioning the way that humans will interact. I think the last sort of 5 years, the push was to getting individuals to own headsets or something in their house and to have personal kind of experiences on their own and have their own kind of content libraries. Whereas I think more and more we're now seeing the tech stacks moving towards more kind of wearable glasses that just augment your live experience, with the idea that that could be an always-on experience. So at this point, I could decide, you know that thing that people say, if you're nervous, just imagine the audience in your underwear? I could just click it on, and there you'd be in your underwear, and that might help me feel confident. But is that a violation of your privacy? Yes, it definitely is. But that's kind of the way that those sorts of tools are being imagined, as a way to kind of give you live augmentation of your world and to be able to listen and collect information about the conversations that you're having, as a sort of an off-board memory. So I think there's a lot of investment towards that, and that connects with AI as well in terms of the ability to kind of synthesize that information. So whether we like that or we don't will impact the kind of art that we need to make in response to it, and how we use those tools critically and objectively. Hi.
I was just thinking about the fact I work in the mental health space. I was thinking about the fact that art is used so therapeutically, and there are lots of people sort of using creative mediums to try and manage their mental health symptoms. And I was just wondering, is there kind of work being done to sort of use immersive arts in a therapeutic way, and can it be used to kind of help manage kind of the experience of the world that maybe people who are struggling with like neurodivergence experience as well? I just wondered if you had any thoughts on that, really.
You're looking at me.
Yeah, I feel like
I've been
you're
talking
the
loads.
expert here on this question.
Yes, definitely. I think a lot of artists in particular have kind of thought about the fact that it does sort of give you this almost like machine to dream with, some people have spoken about, and that you can kind of construct different versions of your inner worlds to kind of reflect on your own experience or to share your experience with other people. I'm going to invite you to talk about Jane's work in a second, I think. There was a piece downstairs in Undershed recently called Impulse, which was looking at the experience of 4 people who live with ADHD and sharing something of their inner worlds and their experience of kind of having to go through life with these different perceptual framings. There's an amazing piece called, by Sarah Tico Hatsumi, Body Paint?
Yeah.
Is that what it's still called? Soul Paint. Thank you. Body Paint sounds good. I'm just doing a bad job. So yeah, have a look for Soul Paint. She now works in this incredible kind of between space between the arts and culture sector and the kind of medical and therapeutic sector. Loosely, what Soul Paint does is it invites you to kind of paint your feelings about your body or your emotions that you hold in your body onto a kind of a physical mannequin in front of you, so you can kind of manifest your pain or where you feel energy or where you feel loss, and it kind of talks you through this beautiful process of kind of annotating your body in a way that actually comes from a body mapping practice, from mental health practice, and then allows you to kind of inhabit that body and look at it in a mirror and give it life and sort of send its energy out of the fingertips. And it's a really like very kind of trauma-informed, mental health practice-informed way of using VR and the embodiment that it can give you and the kind of private time and the personal reflection that it can give you to absolutely kind of use those creative modalities to connect to what might also be a kind of a therapeutic context for you. And there's quite a few people who are starting to think about it in those ways, thinking about its ability to kind of shift mood, or there's lots of weird work on exposure therapy if you want to put spiders on your arm without actually putting spiders on your arm. So there's all kinds of different ways that it gets used in therapeutic context. Might I invite you to talk about some of the work that you've worked on with Jane?
Yes, yeah. Well, I didn't actually work on that one, but I used to work. I still work with sometimes with an artist called Jane Gauntlet, who really kind of, there was this early moment where people were making lots of VR documentaries, and she made a piece of work about her own experience of epilepsy and a brain injury called Dancing with Myself, where audience is kind of, you're kind of behind her eyes or inside her body as she's in a restaurant. It's like a recreation of a seizure that she had in a restaurant, and it's an interesting piece of work because she doesn't recreate the seizure experience. That's kind of her private experience, and she felt she couldn't communicate it, and it's more about kind of the social model of disability, about sharing how the world treats her before and after the seizure. But yeah, there was, in this early VR documentary moment, which I am quite stuck in this one genre. There's definitely more about medical applications of VR, but there was this real impetus that VR was about sharing mental health, what it feels like to be autistic or what it feels like to have ADHD with this imagined audience who don't understand. It was about like sharing experience. But I do think there's this kind of new wave of work, and I'm really excited by some of the conversations I'm hearing from the artists that we funded about what is it like actually to make work for other people in your community, like other neurodivergent people or other people with like certain sensory needs, and how does that shift the work so it's not made for the imagined kind of other person, it's for yourself and for your community. So I'm really excited about that kind of shift in the field.
Thank you. We've maybe got time for there's maybe a couple. Depends on how like swiftly we can and eruditely we can answer these questions. We'll try. Let's go.
Oh, hi. Sorry, I'm secret from that side. Hi. I was just like to go a bit into the distribution, exhibition, production side of things, and I just sort of like thinking about it's a bit of an anecdote, but like I went into like Steam VR and tried to find cool things to look at or art-y things, and sort of struck me that it doesn't seem to be like a space where this stuff is kind of kept or accessible. Is there a reason why it doesn't end up in places like Steam, or
yes,
like is it to do with money, or like yeah, or they only seem to come into sort of temporary pop-up sort of situations, or an exhibition hosts it, or where's the archive of all the VR or XR work? That's wondering out loud.
Such an important question. So Steam VR, for those that don't know, is kind of a store, kind of an amazing like listing of lots of different PC computer games that you can play, and they were one of the first to really create space for VR work particularly, so you can find things on Steam to then play in a headset if you have access to one. With Steam in particular, I think they have such a sort of a strong tradition of being PC gamers, and PC gamers have kind of slightly narrowed in terms of who does PC gaming anymore, so I think they've narrowed with it, and a lot of what you can find on Steam is just assuming that what you want is sort of blades and sorcery. But again, but also the equivalent to that with headsets like Pico or Quest, which are sort of run by the sort of Metas of the world, is you can really find out what they think these things are for when you see what is profiled in the stores. There was an amazing bit of accidental research that they accidentally published from Facebook, from Meta a few years ago, where they gave advice to developers making work for their headsets, and they said, we've done a straw poll of our users, we've segmented them for you, good news guys, we had a little look, and then we've got these types of people, these types of people, these types of people. The ones who are mostly here are what I think they called who are the most sort of gender balanced of all the consumers. Motion, entry practice, connection to nature, don't design for them. They don't spend money. They just have very low conversion rates. They're everywhere. They're messing up the place, and they won't spend money. What you want to target is, I think they call them boastful gamers. who are currently smaller, but we think this is the low-hanging fruit. And they want, they are younger men with larger incomes and disposable income, and are prepared to do micropayments in-game. They're prepared to buy expansion packs. They are going to boast about what they're doing through their Twitch channels and their YouTube channels. This is who you want to target. And so they were actively saying, against all of our data, make work for them. And I think we still see that in the way that app stores are curated and what they showcase and what they don't. One of my most successful pieces of writing is where I just angrily one Christmas wrote something called Best of the Quest, where I made a little listicle of arts and culture content that you could get on these stores if you knew what it was called and could search for it. But it will never show up in your recommendation engine because they don't think that's what is going to sell. So we're still at that point now, and I keep shouting at them and they keep telling me to go away. I'm going to make another list.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to say, I think it's quite difficult as an artist. There's also a difficulty in that I'm kind of making dance work perhaps in VR, and I do have some kind of standalone VR work, but as soon as I've uploaded it to something like the MetaQuest store, it's then also quite difficult for me to continue touring that, because if I'm charging a venue a certain fee to kind of put that work on, I've then got that issue of, but it's available freely here. And because there aren't licensing models in play at the moment, it's not like with kind of licensing. Have a kind of framework in place. It's still very difficult as an artist to know whether to put your work on that, because you get it out there and you want to get it internationally in other ways as well. So I think it's still really tricky and difficult.
Thank you. We've got 1 minute to go. Do you think we've got some for one question, or do you think we'll just beautifully wrap that up in that?
I'm not negative.
No, it's a really important part of the sector, I think, and it is what's kind of stopping some of the kind of proliferation of that audience culture. So it's a really great point to kind of be chewing on, I think. So I will pause it there. I'm going to hand back to my esteemed colleague Jack to tell us what's coming next. But if you join me in saying a big thank you and a round of applause to our panelists.
Really had to kind of stop myself, because as soon as you started to speak about this sort of change in how we engage with audience, but I was really struck by the importance of, I think it was you, Kerry, that talked about that sensitivity and the vulnerability, and that's a really unusual way of hearing people talk about expanded technologies. I think it is that sense of the ethics of, it's such a huge thing. I mean, I'm huge admirers of what you've done, but I think also, I started to think when you were talking about, we're in a cinema now, the audience will come in, it will be a very passive experience. But if we think when filmmaking was on that cusp, and the sense of what do we mean by how our bodies understand things. So I was really struck by that, particularly when there was a discussion around neurodiversity. So it's that sort of fleshing out and understanding that even as we move into this space, that understanding of what our expectations are of the technology will change. And I think that's why this sort of challenging the conventions of what the norm is, and I do think challenging those very big corporate companies that are developing the technology for a very different use to the uses that you've explained today. So I don't know about you guys, but I really do need a drink, because I really need to think about this. But can I, before we go into the sort of little bit of business at the end, can we do a bit of a hoo-hoo, brilliant, wow, I think this was amazing. Thank you. Thank you. So what you will receive via emails, a questionnaire. I know people just sort of want to talk about it in the moment, but it really does help. Remember, this is a sort of live set of research projects, and it's really important for Verity and our colleagues to have that information, and for the university to know what your feelings were about this evening in relation to the festival particularly, which I think mapped absolutely exquisitely. We will be moving to 3. So that's just straight down. So we will march you down so that we have an opportunity to have a drink and celebrate the wonderful work of these artists, and also to get a little bit of an experience. Yes?
I think it's there, yes.
Yes, so we will have a little experience of Kindred and have an opportunity to maybe ask more questions and do a little bit of networking. So thank you very much for coming.